When you gotta go, you need a place to go. So let's build an outhouse. Whether you have a small cabin way out in the country or just a campsite on a family piece of land, the outhouse is the indispensable building. And today I'm going to show you guys one way to build one. My name's Dave Whipple and you're watching Bush Radical. Summertime in interior Alaska. It's a wonderful time of year and it's a great place to spend it. But on this piece of property that my wife Brooke and I have owned for over 3 years, there is no outhouse, and that is a problem. But it's a problem we can fix with a little bit of lumber from the hardware store, some bug spray, and a couple sunny afternoons. So let's get started. Now the first thing I'm going to do is get this truck empty. My son Mick wants to borrow it later on this afternoon. He lives about 6 miles from here. And I need to go through my cut list and get everything cut that I know needs to be cut. I'm only going to use a few simple tools: a tape measure, a pencil, a straight edge, a skill saw, a shovel, a whole lot of shoveling. So we're going to start here. I'm going to cut about 4 of these 2x6s at 47 inches. They're going to be the floor on the inside of the outhouse. Now on the outside of the outhouse, there's going to be kind of a little deck, kind of an approach, almost like a porch. For the 2x6s I'm going to use there, they can be cut just in half. They're 8-footers, so they're actually like 8.25 inches, and I can just cut them right in their very middle, and they can be whatever length they are, because they're going to hang out just a little bit on each side, and that's fine. Now, these 2x4s, I'm cutting at 47 inches. These are ultimately going to be my rafters that hold up the roofing. Last thing I'm going to use, pretty much the first thing I'm going to cut. And here's the rest of that flooring, just cut in half, right at the dead center. When I have all the flooring done, I'll just stack it up and set it aside. Not going to need it for a while. Got a lot of other things to do first. I also need to make some 2x2s. Now, I know I could just go buy 2x2s, and it would be a lot easier than cutting your own, but I'm cheap. And I don't want to buy a whole bunch of different things, so I just bought 2x4s. I'm going to need them anyway, and I'll make my own 2x2s. Done. Now, I bought 7 2x4s for this project, and I ended up with one little piece of scrap. And that's about everything for our framing cut list.
What are you doing? Turn that camera.
Hi, son.
Hi.
Hi.
What can I do for you?
Bring my truck back.
Okay.
So here's how this is going to be laid out. I'm going to have 2 side walls. They're going to be 6'3.5" on the back and 6'11.5" on the front. And that's because they're going to lap over these 4x4s that are going to act as the base. The plywood sides are just going to screw right to the all-weather wood 4x4s. And that's going to give me a height of 6 foot in the back and 6'8" in the front. Then the back wall is going to be standard 4 foot by 6 foot high. And the front wall is going to be 4 foot by 6'8". And I'm going to cut the door out of the front wall. I think this is probably the 7th outhouse I've built in the last 20 years, and I don't have any imagination. I just build them all the same. When it comes to plywood, you're going to need 4 sheets of plywood. So I'm making the measurements that we just talked about on each side and then cutting the diagonal off, and this will give you, of course, the slope for the roof. The pieces that are left over from this diagonal cut, they're pretty much the only scrap on this project, because there's nowhere else in the project that I need any other plywood. Now, when it comes to the 6-foot panel that goes on the back, I'm using the scrap from that to make the toilet seat. And when it comes to the front of the outhouse, the scrap that comes off that is going to be used for the seat riser. So there's no waste other than a couple diagonal cuts. Now I'm going to measure in 9 inches from the side of my front panel and make a line. We're going to cut the door out. The door is going to be reinforced with 2x2s to make it nice and sturdy, because of course this plywood is pretty warped and nasty like all modern plywood. But we'll get this door cut out of there and we'll set that aside. Now once the door is cut out, there are 4 ways that it can go back in. Right side in, wrong side in, upside down, vice versa. So I just use the stamping on there to make sure it's lined up when I build it and install it. This is my favorite part. Get to cut the hole out for the seat. It's kind of a freehand type of thing, you know, just make it how you think it should be. So make a mark at the dead center.
Our hole is going to have to start at least a ½ inch from the edge, because there's going to be a piece of plywood right here. That's the riser. And I'm going to put a piece of plastic in the front. That's going to be a P-shield. And these ribs are, let's say they're about a ½ inch tall. So let's just say 3/4. So if that roofing is 3/4 tall, and I need another ½ inch, I'm going to need 1.25 inches before the hole starts. So we'll just play it safe and say 1.5 inches. Something like that. I think that looks about right. Well, my son Mickey borrowed the truck to run to the lumber yard, and the jigsaw is in the truck. So I guess I'm not cutting the hole right now.
So I guess what we'll do is we'll separate the door from the door panel. When I made the cuts with the skill saw, I kept them just a little bit back from the corner so the whole thing wouldn't fall apart. We'll just take the handsaw and finish those cuts and gingerly move this front panel out of the way. Now, I would like to say now's a good time to ride into town, get an ice cream, and sit in the shade. But it's actually the time to dig the hole. I have to have the hole to make an outhouse. You can't have an outhouse without a hole. And I have a spot picked out, about 100 feet from the campsite. I've cleared out just a couple trees, but most of this clearing was already here, and it's flat, and it's tucked away, and it's pretty much perfect. Now, this black spruce forest with the moss floor, but it's kind of got a magical quality to it. Good place for an outhouse. Now, this sheet is not a full 4x8 sheet, but the whole area is going to be about 4 foot by 8 foot, so I'll just use this sheet to kind of cut the moss out in about the right size. Now, this is my front panel for the outhouse, so it's just a little under 7 foot. So when I cut the moss, I'll go a little bit longer on each end just to make sure that I'm going to get the full 8 feet. Now, because this moss is like a foot thick, I don't want the outhouse to be down in a hole in the moss. So all the dirt that's coming out of the hole, I'm using it to build up both sides, the front and the back, of the cleared area. That way it gets the outhouse up out of the moss. But it does cause one problem. I'm going to need to make sure that this dirt doesn't end up falling back into the hole. Now, most of the soil here is just silt. Hard compacted silt, and it's a lot like digging in chalk. It's fairly easy digging, but it takes a little bit to loosen it up.
Well, I think that's about it. I'm down into a layer of sand right about here. This silt is going to hold its shape really good, but I'm afraid this sand is not going to. So I'm afraid if I go any deeper, I'm just going to have cave-ins down below this layer of this hard packed silt.
I'm going to need a couple poles to make sure that that dirt doesn't slough back in the hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my shovel as a measuring stick. This is about a shovel length is what I need. I'm going to cut a couple chunks out of this dead tree. It'll last for years and years, and I won't worry too much about it. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, just needs to keep the dirt from falling back down in the hole. So as soon as I get these logs set in place, I can start building this outhouse. And I will never again be down in the bottom of this hole. I think I picked the worst day of the year to do this too, because it's the hottest I've seen it so far this year in Alaska. About 83 degrees. Now the design is really simple. What we're going to do is we're going to take two 8-foot long treated 4x4 posts. We're going to set them down in place, and they're basically going to act as the foundation for this outhouse. I've used lots of things in the past for outhouse foundations like this. I've used 6x6s, I've used 4x4s, I've used freshly cut logs that were squared off enough that you could screw the plywood to the sides and screw the planking down to the top and everything would be nice and even. Doesn't matter what you use, so long as it's going to last a long time and it's strong enough to bridge the hole, because that's why we're using 8-foot stock in the first place. It needs to act as a bridge and a foundation. Now we're going to stand up a sheet of plywood on the side and screw it off. Best to put the screws in first. That way they're ready to go when you're ready to go. And as far as where on the 4x4 foundation this should start and stop, I'll just kind of center it over the hole the way you think it looks right. Well, Mick brought my truck back. And along with my truck, I got the jigsaw. So now's a good time to cut that hole for the outhouse seat. Always my favorite part. Now, whether you're going to use a store-bought toilet seat or you're going to just use a piece of foam, toilet seats come in 100 different sizes. So if you're a really big person, make a really big hole. And if you're 5 foot nothing and weigh 100 pounds, make a small. And you're likely going to find a factory-made toilet seat that's going to fit it. Or you can always build one out of 1-inch or 2-inch foam, which is really nice in the winter. Now that we've got the seat all situated, I'm going to take the other part of the seat, the riser, which is the vertical section of the seat. And I'm just going to use it as a template. Set it in place, and I'll use it to mark where my 2x2s are going to need to go to support the seat on the two side walls. Then I'll measure where the first wall is, and I'll put the second wall in the same spot. Set all the screws first, and get ready to stand it up and fasten it off. This kind of gives you something to work with. When the wall is in place before the framing is on, you can work upright. You don't have to work off sawhorses. And I'm telling you, those plastic sawhorses that are here, they're absolutely terrible to work on. So as little as I can use those sawhorses, the better I'm going to feel about things. Now I'm going to put in all the little trimmer pieces, the framing that goes in the corners. I just set them up in place, mark them, cut them up, make sure one side is the same as the other, and that should be about good. Cut them and put them in place and screw them off. Leaving enough room below the line for the 2x2 that supports the seat and enough above for the plywood. And I'll use the piece that's going to end up being the riser for the seat to mark where the riser for the seat goes. Now I'm about ready to install the back wall, which is going to make everything nice and rigid. First, I need to figure out where the support for the seat goes and screw it off beforehand. Because once the wall is up, I'm going to have to be working on kind of both sides to hold the 2x2 in place, and I can't be in the hole and outside of the building at the same time. So that support has got to go on first. I'll make a line to show me where the screws need to go, and I'll fasten that 2x2 that holds the seat up on the other side. Nice. Now the same thing goes for the supports on the sides that are going to hold up the toilet seat plywood. I'm going to have to put those on first, and I'm going to need to kind of be working on both sides of the wall. So if I pre-drill the holes in the right spot, I can just barely set the screws in on the outside of the building, and then I can put my supports in right now while I can still reach everything from both sides of the plywood. Because when the back wall is in, you're going to kind of either be working inside or outside. You can't do both. And for putting these supports on, you kind of need to do both. We'll set that back wall in place, and everything's coming along pretty smooth. About this time in the project, something amazing happened. There was a hatch of these cute little gray moths, and they came out in the thousands. Just a little nondescript gray moth. And they were absolutely everywhere. I was drying laundry on the line, and I must have had 1,000 of them on my clothes. You know, generally, I despise painting. I just want to get it over with. I don't even want to do it to start with. But today, I don't know. I kind of enjoyed myself. I think it's because I'm staining. I'm not painting. I don't know why there's a difference, but there does kind of seem to be, at least to me anyways. I kind of like staining, and I despise painting. And to think about it, I don't guess that makes any sense at all. But something about staining, I think it's because you're seeing the grain of the wood coming through the stain. Now we're going to build the door. And the door is just a simple chunk of the plywood that we cut out earlier, reinforced with some 2x2s that we also cut earlier. Very, very simple. 2x2s are plenty rigid enough to keep this plywood from warping or bending. But it still makes for a very light door. I stained both sides of this door, so when you're in the outhouse, you're going to see a stained front wall, front side and outside. Now, if you see here, the plywood is sticking out a little bit past this last 2x2. That's because I'm going to have to cut it off. When I put the flooring in the outhouse, the door is going to need to clear it, so I got to take a couple inches off that door. About like that. And there we go. Now, because I'm not planning on spending winters up here, I'm just going to use a standard toilet seat. If this was an outhouse you were going to use year-round, here in interior Alaska, you'd want to use a foam seat, rigid foam. In the middle of January, when it's 65 degrees below zero, do you want to come out and sit on a piece of plastic? No, you don't. Foam's the way to go. I had to study these fasteners for a couple minutes to figure out how they're supposed to go in. They kind of lock in with those little splines. Then you put the nut on the bottom. I'm not going to lie, and I'm not proud to say this, but I had to read the instructions to figure out exactly how these went because I'd never seen this design before. Pretty elegant, really. And then there's a little locking cap. Done. Now that the seat's all done and it's ready to be installed, we're going to set that aside and work on the riser. Now with the riser, what we really need is some nailing blocks, or screws in this case. Just something to fasten the top to the bottom, the riser to the seat. So we're putting a block on each end, and we're putting 2 blocks on the top of the riser. and the riser will go right into position. We already have our screws set on the outside of our wall, and they're just going to screw right into those blocks on the sides. And the top of the seat is going to screw right into the nailers at the top of the riser. And the time it took me to say that, I could have just showed you and we'd be done, because it only took a minute to install this. And here you can see why it was important to pre-drill those holes. Otherwise, I'd just be shooting blind trying to figure out where that 2x2 nailer is.
Perfect.
Now we can install those 47-inch floorboards that we cut earlier. Now this is 1/2-inch plywood roughly, and each sidewall takes up a 1/2 inch of space. So our inside dimensions, they're not 48 inches, they're 47. That's why we cut these floorboards at 47. Probably should have cut these 2x2s ahead of time, because it's kind of awkward cutting them off after the fact. But much nicer than trying to notch the board to fit around the 2x2. Just cut the 2x2 off and slide the board under. Or kick it into place if it's a little too tight. And that's all the floor that needs to be exact. The floor on the outside of the outhouse, it can hang over a little bit either side. It's not going to bother me any. And with a few screws, we've got our front wall paneling fastened. Now it's time to do the roof. The roof is those other 47-inch boards we cut earlier. Now, because I'm using big heavy deck screws, I'm going to pre-drill all of these holes. It'll make the battery on the drill last a lot longer. The drill does not like stuffing those big heavy screws in. You can see I have a 2x2 on each side wall set 1.5 inches below the top of the wall. That's going to give me a good support for my roof rafters, and of course it's a nailer. Gives me something to nail into. And I think that looks about right. They're all uniform as far as their spacing, one to the next. Going to be more than enough support for the polycarbonate roof that's going on this building. Now I'm going to put in the door trimmers, the 2x2s that support the door frame itself. You can see how the inside of this door being painted gives it a nice contrast. I should have painted the back wall on the inside also. It would have probably looked a little better that way. Now we're going to put in the deck boards on the outside, the flooring planks that go on the outside, and we're just going to kick them until they look fairly decent, have a similar overhang one side to the other, and that'll give us something to stand on while we install the door. I'll just make sure that the hinges are as far from the top as they are from the bottom so it doesn't look goofy, and screw them off. As far as hinges go, you could probably get away with about anything. This is not a heavy door. It's quite light. Now to put the door in, you need to hold the door up into position. I like to use a special tool called my foot for this job. Get the door where it's supposed to go and get the first screw in. Then from there, the job's done pretty much. Lovely. Now before I get ahead of myself and forget to do it, I'm going to pre-drill these 2x6 planks and put a screw in each one of them.
Just on a side note, I'm putting one screw in a lot of these boards because I just don't have enough screws. So at least I can get everything fastened down, and then I can take a ride to the hardware store and stuff the rest of them in later.
Now, what outhouse would ever be complete without one of these old-fashioned barn door latches? I want to get this job done fast because I'm running a thermocell inside the outhouse here to keep the mosquitoes from killing me, but I don't want to just fume myself out. That looks about right. Pre-drill the hole, stuff in the eye screw, and we should be just about there. I like to use a nail to turn these things in. It's pretty hard to do with just your fingers. And there we go. Nice. Now I need to measure the actual angle cut to see how long it actually is. Looks like it's 49.5 inches overall.
We got 49.5. I'm going to go 2 inches overhang for the front, 2 more inches for the back.
There's no better way to mark a straight line on roof paneling than to use another chunk of roof panel. Just set one over top of the other at the right mark and trace it out with a good old Sharpie. And I like to use every color of screw because that's what I've got. Now there's only one last problem to overcome on this build, and that is screwing down the roofing. But I don't have a ladder because my son has it, along with my chop saw and my good level. So I'm going to have to use the ladder I have, which unfortunately is the worst ladder that has ever been made. Only about half of it isn't rotten. The other half is. So I'm just going to cut this sucker off where I think it's halfway solid. And once we're done with it, it's going right to the burn pile, baby. When we cleaned out this bunker a couple years ago, I was amazed how very few things in there were of any value whatsoever. There was hardly anything in there that was usable. The roof had collapsed years ago and just snow and rain had rotted everything. And never in my wildest dreams would I have ever thought the one thing I would end up using from that was the rotten ladder. But here we are, and there it goes. Oh, beautiful. With the roof on, you would assume we're completely done, but we are not completely done. There's one more thing, the most important thing in a proper outhouse build. I like to cut corners as much as anybody, but this is one thing you should never cut corners on, and that is the P-shield. The P-shield goes inside the riser, and it keeps the riser from getting soaked over the years with urine. Quite simple, right? Without a P-shield, you're going to have a terribly foul outhouse. And roofing works perfect for this, so just buy a little extra roofing and you'll have a piece to cover that riser and keep it nice and dry. Now comes the worst part of all, cleaning up. I hate cleaning up. I'd prefer making messes, and I've made a pretty good one here. I've got stuff pretty much everywhere strewed out, and of course I haven't kept things tidy along the way, so now's the time to get everything picked up and back to normal. And there you have it, the world's greatest outhouse. Perfectly constructed from the finest materials. Situated in a beautiful wilderness setting that's not only going to supply you with the privacy that you want, but also the ambiance that's going to make the experience that much better. Bugs, birds, squirrels, the sounds of nature all around. It's the perfect place to go when you need to go.
We're even going green on this project. 100% recycled bathroom tissue. Recycled bathroom tissue.
I gotta say, I love the polycarbonate roofing just for the natural light that it brings. But one thing to keep in mind, if your outhouse is going to be somewhere that's really sunny, it's going to get really hot with a clear roof like this. And of course, every outhouse needs a library, and because it's peak mosquito season and it's been 85 degrees, I think this'll do. Now you'll have to excuse me while I make sure it works.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this building project, and maybe if you're going to build an outhouse in the future, it gave you some ideas. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name's Dave Whipple, and you've been watching Bush Radical. And be radical, eh? See you soon.